This week, the book of Bamidbar, the book detailing the story of the Jewish people in the 40 years in the desert, comes to a close. For 40 years we were in the desert, but the book of Bamidbar itself details only the very beginning of that period, about the first 2 years, and the very end of that period. But leaves as a blank all those decades in between. The 40 years in the desert were not only a punishment as a result of the sins of the Jewish people, but as made clear in a number of places in the book of Devarim, this period was a period designed for spiritual growth, to allow Am Yisrael to become what they became, allow them to reach the level necessary to enter the land. However, it's not clear what was the significance of the processes that they went through during those 40 years. I'd like to share with you some insights about some of the dynamics that I believe happened during that period, dynamics that could be relevant to us today, gleaned from the autobiography of a dear friend of mine, Rabbi David Zeller, who untimely passed away a number of years ago. And in his book and in his life story impacts and illuminates different stories that took place during the time of the desert. He himself does not make the connection. However, I believe that that his life story and the story of what Bnei Yisrael went through in the desert are connected. Rabbi David Zeller grew up in a Reformed Jewish family in California. For many years, and he was searching for spirituality, as he mentioned, throughout his life. And at one point, he hitchhiked from Turkey to India, through Afghanistan, good old days, and for a time lived as a Sadhu in India. A Sadhu is a person who relinquishes all possessions and tries to live based on a belief that all comes from God, and during that process he ultimately took place the changes that led him to come back to Judaism. But he shares during the course of his book of some lessons about life, about connection to God he learned during that period. One story he tells is that part of the point of being a sadhu is believing that, trusting to God, that ultimately you'll have what you need to eat and get by. And as a result, one day he was offered some bread, some food, but he ate what he needed to eat, but he took a bunch of spare food, hid it away somewhere, because you never know what's going to be, where's my next meal going to come from. But that night he was invited to a banquet, and at the banquet he was able to eat his full, and meanwhile the bread that he put away got a bit stale, and he realized that he really should, to be devoted to the path that he chose, he really should choose to continue believing that with the good people around him, belief in God, somehow he'll get what he needs and be more laid back about it. When he finished sharing this anecdote with us, I think it's so reminiscent about the story in the desert of the man. About 40 years learning, day in, day out, to trust to God that ultimately He will provide, and during that period not storing away, but realizing if God says that you'll have your daily portion, you'll have it, and learning to live belief that God ultimately gives you your substance. Now, I think the reality we live in is not in the desert that we have the daily man, and not a sadhu lives in a society that people are naturally give you your substance. So I believe that truth must be combined with our ability, our necessity to do that what we can, to our hishtadlut, our efforts. But ultimately, to take from these experiences, ultimately have a faith that not everything is based on our efforts. We do what we can, but ultimately we have faith in God to ultimately give us our sustenance. A second issue, story he shares with us is he mentions one day his teacher saw him looking with big eyes at this wagon filled with brown sugar, and the teacher realized that Zeller still had a way to go to wean himself from his desire for the sweets. So he tells Zeller, I have a friend who has a farm and he grows this type of sugar. Tell him I sent you and he'll give you as much as you want. And sure enough, Rav David, he makes it over to that farm, and the person hears that this teacher who had sent him said, you know what, eat as much as you want. And he ate, and he ate, and he ate. And he ate, and he ate, and he ate. And since that day, he cannot bear looking, touching, or tasting brown sugar. And this again is a way of educating people, sometimes giving them what they want, and till ultimately they themselves maybe achieve a disgust of and become immune to the temptations of that. And this is reminiscent of the story in the Midbar of the desire for meat. There was a tremendous desire for meat, and ultimately they were given their desire till the meat came out of their noses from the great quantities, and giving things in great quantities is sometimes the way to help wean somebody from a addiction. But the third and the most significant lesson, and this is really the essence of what I wanted to share with you today, is he tells us about the experience that he had, that one night he had a walk through some forest, and as a sadhu he doesn't have any shoes, and he's walking in the night, it's dark around him, and he's constantly involved in where's his next step gonna be. His feet, there's thorns on the floor, and since in India cows are sacred and they leave their droppings all over the place, there are all sorts of other things on the floor, and he constantly is working on not to step in the thorns and not to step on the cow droppings. So he jumps over something, but it turns out afterwards it was only a shadow he jumped over, and he landed exactly in what he wanted to avoid. And as his feet are getting bruised, and as the tension is building up in his feet, he realizes that his efforts to take control of his steps, how futile they are. And then he realizes that this is actually a parable about his life in general. He wants to be fully in control of his life, but so much of where his steps are leading him are beyond the forces that he tries to keep in control. And realizing that, again, he should do the best he can, but ultimately to realize that the story of my life is not under my control. I do what I can, but I realize that there are other forces that are guiding my steps. That insight taught him about his life, and on that night allowed his feet to relax. He still would step on thorns and on cow droppings during that night, but realizing that he's not in control of his situation allowed a relaxation that even when he stepped on it, it was less painful. And thinking about that insight, it very much echoes the experience that the Jewish people had in the desert. The Jewish people would camp in dozens of places during that period. They would reach the camp, and as the Torah teaches us, Al Pi Hashem Yis'u, Al Pi Hashem Yichanu, Al Pi Hashem Yis'u, based on the word of God, they would camp. Based on the word of God, they would continue traveling. They would arrive at a place, and they would know that they don't know how long they're going to be there. And there are forces beyond them that are determining and guiding their next stop and their next step. In fact, in the morning, there's a prayer that, a blessing that we say in the morning, Hamechin mitzadei gaver. We bless God who guides the steps of man. And this blessing is teaching us that, again, that our steps are not under our full control. Ultimately, God guides our steps, and for this we bless and thank Him. And I'd like to share with you a story about this guiding of our steps by God, and the reality that often our steps are taken in a direction against what we planned, but ultimately we are grateful. I used to have a car that when I take it for the yearly test, this car which had seen better days, the mechanics would always tell me that your engine could go at any moment. So I tried nevertheless to try to get as much as I can from the engine. But one year my children were in America, and I knew that it would come the day that I would have to pick them up from the airport. They would be flying alone, and I thought with Murphy's Law, my engine's going to go just the day that I have to pick them up. So I decided that it's come the time I'm going to get a different engine. I'm going to change the engine, and therefore feel the confidence that I could arrive at the airport to pick up my kids when they come. So I changed the engine, and a few days later I'm on my way to the airport to pick up my children. And right before the city, and I'm thinking to myself how I was so smart to do this, because now I could feel confidence that I'm going to make it to the airport. And right before the city of Kiryat Gat, on the way to the airport, I hear this terrible noise coming up from the engine. I stop in Kiryat Gat. Fortunately, it's a little bit before 5 o'clock, and there's still a garage open. And it turns out that when they put in the new engine, they didn't close the plugs strongly enough. And since the engine of that car worked on turbo, which is very powerful air pressure, somehow the turbo blew out the plugs, and the plugs are scattered between Otniel and Kiryat Gat. The mechanic looks at the engine. He's closing up. He says, "You know what? You need intensive care for this car, and I'm going to give you the equivalent of a Band-Aid." So he put something in, closed up, did whatever he did. Somehow, thank God, I made it to the airport quite late, picked up the kids, made it back home safely, and the next day I knew I'm going to have to go to the garage for them to finally fix this problem. But that same morning I began a chavrusa, a study with a friend of mine on the Siddur, on the prayer book. We started from the beginning, and we went through the daily morning blessings, and we each asked the other to pick one of the morning blessings that touched them in the course of our morning study. And I chose that blessing of Hamechin Mitzadei Gaver, to bless God, to thank Him for guiding our daily steps. And as I put it, I said, again, what does this mean? It means that presumably you want to do one thing, ultimately your steps did something else. Instead of getting upset about it, you thank God. After that, right away I forgot that conversation because I had other issues to deal with. I drove my car to Yerushalayim, where the garage is. Thank God I made it there. And in the garage, they apologize, but when I come to the garage, I see at the other edge of the garage one of our students. And I'm happy to see a familiar face. I wave, I smile, I come close. But then I discover this is not one of my students at all. It's somebody else that I've just made a very embarrassing mistake. So of course I apologize for presumption, being so friendly to him. And I say, "I thought you were one of our students." And he goes, "What? You thought I'm a yeshiva student?" And he was very, very emotionally moved by that. He said, "It can't be. I've been, it's not me." And I say, "Well, you have this light in your eyes that reminds me of this student of mine." He goes, "Me? I have light in my eyes? You're crazy." Anyway, It turns out this was the son of the owner of the garage, and we spent a couple of hours together talking about Judaism in the office of the garage owner. And finally, the car is ready. We depart, but that day I had a wedding right outside Jerusalem, so I just thought it doesn't pay to go all the way back to my hometown in Otniel. I'll wait around in Jerusalem till the time for the wedding comes around, but I'll make sure I'll be the first person there, and to end this long day, I'll leave right after the chuppah and get home at a reasonable hour. So it comes the time to go to the wedding, and I turn on the ignition, and somehow I have a feeling that it's not going smoothly, that ultimately I did turn on the ignition, but I had a feeling that there's some problem here. So I said, no, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to go back to the garage and have them take a look at it right away. I go back to the garage, they tell me, no problem, there's something with the gas, it's not clean enough, they'll have it fixed up in a jiffy. And then the son of the owner of the garage comes to me and says that he decided he wants to buy a pair of tefillin. Now I know that tefillin sometimes, it's important to know who to buy from, to know that it's somebody reliable, the price and the quality. So I said, give me your name and I'll try to help you investigate a place to buy tefillin. So he said, my name is Ro'i. So I write down his name, the Hebrew letters Resh, Vav, Aleph, Yud. He says, no, my name is not Ro'i with the letter Aleph, which means about seeing. It's Ro'i with the letter Ayin, which has a very different meaning. But I said, you know what? I told you in the morning, there's a light in your eyes. I'm writing Ro'i. Ro'i is with an Aleph, about seeing. And I mentioned, he said his full name is Ro'i Nohorai, and Nohorai is the name of Rabbi Meir, of one of the sages of the Mishnah. Meir is light, and Meir as Norai relate to light. I said, I told you, Ro'i Norai, your name is all about light. I told you have your light in your eyes. Anyway, I take the car, I'm driving to the wedding, which is a little bit out of Jerusalem, and as I'm going up this big hill up to Mevaseret, suddenly in the middle of the highway, the car goes. Cars to the left of me, cars to the right of me, people stopping on the highway to yell at me and say, why did you stop your car right in the middle of the highway? I closed the car, waited a few minutes, then ultimately I managed to turn on the ignition. I kept the air conditioner closed, the light closed, everything closed except the ignition itself, and I made it up that hill. But when I got to the wedding, it was the very last moment of the chuppah. And I look at the chuppah, and under the chuppah, standing next to the chatan, is the son of the owner of the garage. But then I come close and I realize it's not the son of the owner of the garage, it's the same student that I thought I saw in the morning. And the truth is, this student, he, in fact, I don't know if didn't really qualify to be called a student of mine, because when he came back from the army, after a few days in yeshiva, that I was the Rebbe of the students that had come back from the army, after a few days he decided the yeshiva wasn't for him and he left. And I always felt that had I spent some more time with him on those first few days, maybe he would have stayed and things would have turned out differently. So the chuppah ends, I go up, I give him a big hug, and I say, all day I've been thinking about you and about the light in your eyes. And he goes, me? I have light in my eyes? Are you crazy? Anyway, we had a long, very beautiful conversation. Ultimately, I made it home a lot later than I had planned. And as I'm driving in, I'm realizing that the whole story of my day is exactly that insight that I learned from that blessing in the morning. Hamichin Metzedei Gaver. Realizing we do our best efforts, but ultimately, the forces guiding our steps in life are forces beyond us, and by realizing that so many of the things that didn't go the way they should have gone come from above and not from below, help us look and find a way to find joy and meaning in those seeming missteps, to take us above and not below. Shabbat Shalom.